Week 16 of the fantasy football season with semifinals here. His quarterback starts hit every matchup this week. Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. Matthew Stafford, obviously in the MVP voting. He's going to be a favorite. Him and Drake May, I believe, to win the MVP race this season. And this week, even in a tougher matchup versus a good defense of the Seattle Seahawks, it's his Thursday night game. I know Devontae Adams most likely not playing in this game, but Matthew Stafford to start. Sam Darnold, the city's been inconsistent over the last couple weeks. Is Sam Darnold still having a good season and still good team success, obviously, for the Seattle Seahawks team. But like I said, in the semifinal game, where his numbers have been up and down, he's not a quarterback I would trust weekly. He's a sit. Philadelphia Eagles at the Commanders, first of two Saturday ball games. Jalen Hurts, he's a start each and every week. This week, a good matchup at the Commanders, a defense that can't stop anyone, where the Giants took them to the limit in last week's game. Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown over the last month, and they're getting things going and putting up numbers. Marcus Mariota, a sit. Mariota, he's been one of the better backup quarterbacks in all the league, and he actually goes out there and makes plays. He could get you fantasy points with his legs, but this week in a very tough matchup with the Eagles coming in, he's an easy sit. Green Bay Packers at the Bears. Jordan Love, he's a start. I know Jordan Love, his numbers weren't great last week. We know Christian Watson banged up, even though he should be fine and possibly ready to go in this ball game here in Week 16. But Jordan Love, he's the type of quarterback, after a bad game, he usually goes out there and bounces back. And this week in a matchup at a pretty decent bad defense, I still will put Love in the lineup as a start. Caleb Williams, a fringe option. He's been up and down in his second season as Caleb Williams, even though this offense is putting up points in this Ben Johnson system, bringing it over from Detroit, where he was the coordinator there, and now the head coach with the Chicago Bear team. But this Packer defense, even without Micah Parsons, still could create havoc, still create some turnovers. And I think this week, Caleb Williams, he's been a hit-or-miss quarterback a majority of the season. He's a fringe option. Los Angeles Chargers at the Dallas Cowboys. Justin Herbert to start. This Cowboy defense can't stop anyone, and they made J.J. McCarthy look like a Pro Bowler in last week's game, running for touchdowns, passing for a couple touchdowns, staying in the pocket, making plays. And this week at the Cowboys, I think Herbert goes out there and he has a good ball game. Dak Prescott to start. It's been a solid season for Dak Prescott, and this Cowboy team now losing 2 in a row after 2 great victories versus the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs in 12 and Week 13, but the last couple weeks, numbers have dropped a little bit for Dak Prescott. Also as well, George Pickens, his numbers have dropped. But this week, this could be a potential high-scoring game once again. I would start him. Minnesota Vikings at the New York Giants. J.J. McCarthy, he's a fringe option. It's been an up-and-down season here for McCarthy, but the last 2 weeks, he's going out there. He's putting up points, even though I know this couple weeks has been favorable matchups. But once again, this week, it's a favorable matchup at the Giants that can't stop anyone. So he's a fringe option. Jackson Dart, concussed once again. Highly doubtful he plays in this game is Jackson Dart, but we don't know 100%. So if he does give it a go, he's a start. But the thing is, he's been concussed or checked for a concussion 5 out of the 10 games he started this season is Jackson Dart. So obviously that's not a good thing. And this week, like I said, I doubt he plays in this one, but no official word yet. So if he plays, he's a start. And Jameis Winston most likely will be the starting quarterback if he plays. And Winston, you don't know what kind of Winston you're going to get weekly, but for a guy to come off the bench versus a pretty decent defense of the Minnesota Vikings, I'm not going to start him this week. He's a sit. Cincinnati Bengals at the Miami Dolphins. Joe Burrow is start. I know last week it was a horrible game for Joe Burrow. He couldn't get anything going. Chase still had his game with 132 yards, but Burrow bad interceptions, especially one that got returned for a 95-yard pick six in that one. But this week it's a good matchup in Miami. I think Burrow will get back on track, and there's a possibility T. Higgins returns to the lineup as well, which is always a plus. One of the better number 2 wide receivers in the league. Now to the Dolphins, Tua. It's been a down year for Tua once again this season with the Miami Dolphins. But the Dolphins were on a 4-game winning streak, and then obviously they lost last week was this Miami Dolphin team. So this week, 6-8 coming in. Cincinnati, not a great defense. Obviously, they can move the football a little bit, but Tua all season long, to me, just hasn't been a fantasy option. So he's a sit this week. New York Jets at the New Orleans Saints. I know it's a good matchup for this New York Jet team, but if it's Tyrod Taylor, Justin Fields, Brady Cook, they're all sits in this one. The Jet offense last week, they didn't look great in that ball game with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And like I said, I know this New Orleans defense isn't any good, but in a semifinal game, you're not going to trust one of these Jet quarterbacks with no offensive weapons really, where it's a young Mason Taylor and 2 newer receivers from a month ago getting traded to New York, and Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie. So obviously, even in a decent matchup on paper, it's Tyler Shuck, a fringe option. He's going out there. He's improving weekly as Tyler Shuck. I've been saying that in videos in previous weeks. And this week it is a good matchup versus the New York Jets, a defense that traded away a lot of good pieces in the deadline. Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, Michael Carter, and also just fired defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. But still, Tyler Shuck, even at home with the Jets coming in, to me, he'd still be a fringe option. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Carolina Panthers. Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans back in the lineup last week. Went out there, had one of his better games in weeks. It was Baker Mayfield. So this week, big division matchup, obviously. Both these teams fighting for the division title. And Baker Mayfield with Mike Evans back in the lineup, it just improves his stats, obviously, and his chances to get the football in the end zone with a big deep ball threat and a big target in Mike Evans with his playmaking ability. So he's a start, and Bryce Young is sit. I know Young's had a couple decent games here and there, but then last week in a game where he had a favorable matchup at New Orleans, he didn't really do much in that game. So like I said, in the semifinal games, there's just some quarterbacks you can't trust, and Young's one of them. He's a sit. Buffalo Bills at the Cleveland Browns. Josh Allen, a big game last week, led the comeback from 21-0 in that one to beat the New England Patriots and keep the AFC East chances alive to win that division. So Allen's a stud, was number one quarterback off the board, and once again having a monster year. And this week at Cleveland, he's a must-start. Shedeur Sanders is sit. Shedeur, he hasn't looked good over the last couple weeks. He's taking big hits, turning the football over, holding on to the football too long. And it also has to do with he don't have great options right now. Jerry Jeudy has been down. Isaiah Bond hasn't been great. And pretty much the only bright spot in the passing game has been Harold Fanning. But this week, versus a veteran defense of the Bills, he's a sit. Vegas Raiders at the Texans. If it's Geno Smith, Kenny Pickett, those guys you're not starting. This is a very tough matchup versus arguably the best defense in all pro football, the Houston Texans, where both these quarterbacks, especially Geno Smith, obviously this season, he hasn't been good. He's been a turnover machine and taking big hits. And Kenny Pickett, he's been a bust of a pick where he's bounced around over the last couple seasons. So this week, these guys, most likely, they're going to take big beatings, whoever the starter is in this one, and have a bad game where this Raider offense isn't good anyway. CJ Stroud to start. Last couple weeks, he's starting to come in his zone. Nico Collins are making big plays for this Houston Texan team. Dalton Schultz is a solid number 2 option in this passing game. And we've seen Jaden Higgins emerge a little bit. Even though last week he had a down game, he's playing a little bit better. So Stroud this week in a good matchup with Vegas coming in. An easy start. Atlanta Falcons at the Arizona Cardinals. Kirk Cousins is a fringe option. Last week, a big game. It wasn't the upset victory at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Kirk Cousins, he has Tampa Bay's number throughout his career. So this week, it's a good matchup on paper on the road at Arizona. But 2 weeks in a row, I don't think Kirk Cousins is going to go out there and put up huge numbers. I know Drake London, there's a decent possibility he returns to the lineup this week. But still, Kirk Cousins, to me, is a fringe option at best. Jacoby Brissett start. He's just racking up yards week after week. I know most of these games, they're getting blown out in third, fourth quarter where they got to drop back and throw the football. Pretty much the remainder of the game is where he's getting his numbers. What fantasy numbers are fantasy numbers, and he's putting up 20-plus a week easily is Jacoby Brissett. And him and Trey McBride are locked in. So this week, with the Falcons coming in, and this backfield with 3 running backs out, and James Conner, who's been out a while now for the season. Same with Trey Benson and Bam Knight getting hurt last week. Once again, I think Brissett and this offense airs it out. Kansas City Chiefs at the Tennessee Titans. So the Chiefs, obviously, they're eliminated. Patrick Mahomes, unfortunately, torn the ACL in last week's game. And now Gardner Minshew is going to be the starting quarterback. And Minshew, he does have that gunslinger mentality. He does throw that football down the field, try to make big plays. But obviously in a semifinal game and not playing all season long, even with good playmakers in Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, he's a sit. And Cam Ward is sit. Very tough matchup. Kansas City coming in. Cam Ward hasn't been a fantasy option all season long. It's been a tough rookie year. And also they don't really have real number 1 options in the receiving room. So he's a sit this week. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Detroit Lions. Aaron Rodgers is start. The last 2 weeks, he's really turned back the clock. Is Aaron Rodgers a big road victory? In Week 14, it was at the Baltimore Ravens. We had a good game. And then last week, it was an easy one versus the Miami Dolphins, where it was a blowout victory. I know the Dolphins had a couple garbage time touchdowns late in that one, but Aaron Rodgers, he's getting the feel back. He's getting more acclimated with his teammates. We saw Valdez-Scantling score a touchdown. Adam Thielen's second week in the playbook. And now they got some veteran receivers over here to go with DK Metcalf. even though in terms of them going out there making plays, they're not going to have a big impact, I think, these players. But in terms of being on this roster and making a few plays here and there, it can help Aaron Rodgers in this offense. So this week at Detroit, they know they need points. So Rodgers, I actually would start him. Jared Goff a start. Last week, a big game versus former team at the Rams, even though they lost over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns in that one. And when you got 2 receivers like St. Brown and Jameson Williams, who's really come on the last 6 weeks here, it makes everything easier. So this week in another potential high-scoring game, Goff a start. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Denver Broncos, Trevor Lawrence to start, coming off of 6 touchdowns last week. I know it's a different game week by week, and this is one of the better defenses in the league, obviously, of the Denver Broncos. But Trevor Lawrence, he's been running hot over the last couple weeks here. Him and Jacoby Myers are locked in. Brian Thomas, he's getting back to a little bit what he was doing last season. So this week, even in a tough matchup, I would start Lawrence. Bo Nix a start. It just seems like third, fourth quarter, Nix turns it on. Because there's times, first half of the game, he's got 7-8 fantasy points, and then he finishes the night with 35-40 fantasy points. So him and Cortland Sutton are locked in. He's really spreading the football out, and we know at home he's been a way better quarterback than he's been on the road. So this week versus a mediocre Jaguar defense, he's a start. Sunday night, New England Patriots at the Baltimore Ravens. Drake May, obviously in the MVP running. Him and Stafford, I think, are going to win it this season. Is the MVP. And Drake May last week, he got off to the hot start. And then second half, they got shut down pretty much by Buffalo, only scoring 10 points. But May, he's having a great season, like I said. This week, a pretty good matchup with Baltimore. And I think he bounces back this week and puts up his numbers. Lamar Jackson a start. I know Lamar the last 5-6 weeks, he really hasn't been the same. I don't think he's 100% as Lamar Jackson. We know the playmakers in the receiving and tight end room haven't helped out either. Where Zay Flowers, he's had his drop passes. Mark Andrews, he really hasn't done much. So pretty much this has been a run-first team, and Lamar's trying to figure things out and get back to form. Even though last week I thought he had a decent game for Cincinnati, but I still would put him in the starting lineup this week. And you got to roll with some of your players that you drafted early. You got this far in the season. What's another week here to see maybe they could break out or not in the final game? San Francisco at the Colts. Brock Purdy start. This offense is rolling now the last few weeks since Purdy's been back. George Kittle putting up big numbers. Jawan Jennings, he's shown he could be a true number one for this 49er team in the receiving room. And Christian McCaffrey is going to be Christian McCaffrey, catching the football and running in between the tackles and making big plays. So this week at Indianapolis, on the fast track, Purdy is a start and Phillip Rivers is sit. It's a good comeback story, no doubt about it, for Phillip Rivers. But obviously a lot of quick outs, short passes on bubble screens and slants they were running in that ball game. And hey, they were close all the way to the end, but obviously they drove down Seattle and won on a field goal. But this week, Phillip Rivers, we'll see if he can get a little bit more into it this week. Well, last week he was having a feel for things after not playing for 5 seasons, but still, to me, he's not a fantasy option. So that's quarterback starts at every matchup for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.